So, hi everybody, joined by Paul Morrell, a former Chief Construction Advisor to UK Government, who's our keynote at next week's conference. So we just want to have a little bit of a chat leading up to the conference. Paul's sort of the keynote for the building safety part of the conference. So I think we got to start by saying 2 weeks on since Grenfell Phase 2 report. Just what are your sort of reflections?
I think as an analysis of what happened, it's brilliant, as you would hope it would be, but there was also was put to it. And in terms of the background to it, the whole series of events that led up to the fire, the happenings or lack of happenings after the fire, as I say, I think it's unanswerable really, and it's as damning as you'd expect it to be, and as serious as the evidence and the subject matter are demand. I think in terms of identifying non-technical causes, organizational causes and behavioral causes, the bad behavior was self-evident. But I think it leads to some conclusions, some recommendations, certainly in our world, the world of making products and designing, constructing buildings. I have some fears for the recommendation. And just to press straight on, I think they come under three categories probably. The first one is the practicality of them. Some of them are hugely resource consumptive at a time when we don't have many resources. And I think that therefore there needs to be a reality check on what the propositions are, because there's no point in putting anything into a system that has no capacity. But the bigger issues really, the strategic issues, are under two headings. One is the fact that it may be a long, slow journey, but it's only a few years since the building safety was this Judith Hackett's report, a terrific report, and the Building Safety Act was a progeny of that. And although penetration is slow, I think people are just beginning to get that it's serious. That there will be sanctions and consequences of not accepting the new duties and recognizing that what you have to do to live up to them. And some of the recommendations in the Grenfell Tower Inquiry report disrupt them. They recommend quite a wholesale change of a government department, of the regulatory structure, and so on. And suddenly you're back in a world of uncertainty, which is never helpful when you're still trying to bed an industry which is so fragmented, so big, that getting lessons across the whole is very difficult. And the second thing, which also comes out of Judith Hackett's work, really is that report set a kind of principle, which is we can't keep telling everybody exactly what they should do in every circumstance they're going to find in designing and constructing buildings. They have to accept some overarching duty within their own craft to achieve a safe result. I think that sort of sequence of set a duty, define, if you want to, prescriptive measures by which people are required to show that they're living up to the duty, and then leave ultimately the courts to decide whether people have used due diligence in living up to that duty. But we can start looking at what due diligence means now. And again, I think that one of the underlying messages of the final report, as I read it, of the inquiry, is starting to look at a much more prescriptive world, a world in which much more gets put back on the regulator and so on. And I think that's in danger of kicking us off a track which we are, albeit haltingly, on our way on. So those are the big strategic issues, I guess. Practicality, the resource implications, disrupting both the structure in which we're working and the principle against which we're working, following Building Safety Act, introducing a whole new period of uncertainty. And if you're a building control officer, for example, if they're going to review whether there should be any such thing as private sector building control, and indeed they're going to review whether local authorities should keep control of building control, anybody who works in building control now has suddenly been told, I don't know what your career is going to look like not after 6 months of considering it, but then after bringing in a new regime. So, where does that leave us? So it's about just throwing everything up in the air too much. And on my part, a belief that actually we can get to the same place in a different way, working with the system, but making it work down in the grinding details, in truth, where the answer lies.
Yeah, I read the article. I think you wrote last Thursday in Construction News. So what I'll do, I'll put a link to that article but below this when we post the
By all means,
video as
yeah.
well for people. And you are the joint author of the Independent Construction Product Testing Report as well. And I noticed the week before the Phase 2 report came out, there was two announcements from the new government. One was around I think the BS 476 national standard for around fire safety, and then also around the abolishment of the June 2025 deadline for UK CE marks. Both topics covered in your report. What's your reflection on the response to your report?
Well, first of all, I was obviously somewhat encouraged to see a positive recognition of the review on the first day Parliament came back in September. I hope that's an indication of things to come. Oh, BS 476, there's a certain irony, I guess, in celebrating Brexit and then abolishing a British standard in favour of a European one. The reservation I'd have about that, and certainly the reports that it needed reviewing, the reservation I'd have about it is that there are lots of parts of BS 476, and some parts have been working quite well, of which internal fire doors, I would say, as an example. A lot's been made of, the role of internal fire doors in the Grenfell Tower fire, but of course those were composite doors, were timber doors when they were tested, stood up very well. And we've got a third-party product and process system around timber doors, and again the same theme as my answer to your question on the Grenfell Tower inquiry. If we've got something that works, maybe let's not throw it away. It means we lose all the data that was prepared on the basis of one standard and so on. There is more than one point of view about whether the European standard is as good as the BS in respect of a fire door. So that's my only reservation, really, whether the transition period will be enough for us to keep a decent certification scheme that people can trust and believe in. There are not that many in the industry. And transfer the knowledge to a new standard. As far as the other bits of BS 476 are concerned, I haven't heard much complaint. That it's generally agreed, I think, that the EN standard is better. On your other question, which I've already forgotten.
I think it could be a similar answer, but it's another irony of Brexit that we're going to go to a new regime around UK CE marks, and I hear the radiator.
Oh yeah,
76 years to do all, and that's been pushed all the way back now. Is it sort of floating?
It is a bit weird. The two things I say about that. First of all, it was entirely predictable that it would need to be postponed. And indeed, our first in the first meeting that Annalisa and I had with the Minister, after being asked to do the review, which was probably within about 2 weeks of being commissioned, we said, you're going to have to move that date. Please don't just kick the can down the road, make a plan.
Yeah.
But it starts with a question, which is, what's it for? What's marking for? And I was pretty amazed when I asked that question in the department to be told, well, it's for a single market. I said, well, we're not in a single market now, so what's it for now? And the answer, well, that's another question. To which, yes, it's the one, however, it's the one I'm asking. So we can't actually do anything sensible with marking until we know what it's for. Is it a quality mark? Is it a safety mark? Because it's hugely misunderstood, by the way. I mean, all it is a mark of probably compliance with European standards, and delivering what the European standards do. So we can't get any progress until we decide what the marking is for. And at least we've now been told whenever we make this change, there'll be a 2-year transition period, which is more realistic. Because I made the point again very clearly. Look, it's a long time, maybe 2 years or longer, but the time it takes to conceive, design, develop, and bring to market a new product is huge. And you can't play fast and loose with that and the needs of manufacturers to understand the rules by which they're playing. So I'm hoping that we've now been told it'll be at least 2 years before any change comes in, and that will reflect. So, but first question is, what's it for? What does it mean? And that's what's in the review, really. What do you want it to do? It would, however, be very ironic if we carry on accepting CE marking and then impose additional requirements for stuff that's made in the UK. So that's a point to make in response to the Grenfell Tower, recommendation, which is that basically the regulator does it all. How does a regulator test a product that comes from Europe if we've already agreed that we'll accept it at the border as being compliant? So a hideous irony you could have is that stuff made in Europe sails into the market unencumbered, but stuff made here has to submit to a new marketplace. That would be the very reverse of what was supposed to happen as a consequence of Brexit. So let's see how that one plays out.
And just jumping back to the phase 2 report, the sort of maybe was a little hidden away at the end, but they're going to bring back the role of the chief government construction advisor. Do you see that as a good thing?
They're not saying that. I mean, I've certainly seen the headlines, the resurrection of the chief construction advisor. And of course, personally, I'm all in favour of resurrection. But it's not the same job. Yeah. If you read the small print of what that chief construction advisor will do, it's all regulatory.
Okay.
And certainly in the way that I acted when holding that title, I was very careful to separate the three functions of government as the industry's client, as its sponsor, and its regulator. And I stayed away from regulatory matters other than at strategic level. The job they've described really is the job that was previously done by the Building Regulations Advisory Committee and its chair.
Yeah.
Very ably done by, most recently, by Howard Davey. Yeah. And I think that, when I was in the chief construction advisor role, one thing I did fight quite hard for was to keep the Building Regulations Advisory Committee in the bonfire of the quangos on the grounds that we needed it. And indeed, it was free. There was a huge amount of underappreciated voluntary effort went into it. And I said then that if you abolish it, you need to reinvent it, and you'll have to pay for it, which, of course, to a degree is what's now happened. I think the way around that, again, rather than completely disrupting the machinery we've just made, is to have an independent chair of the Building Advisory Committee, rather than it being the regulator. It's the governance issue anyway, and the regulator kind of advising itself. But an independent chair with a direct line to a minister and/or Secretary of State, so that they get listened to, would be a valuable function as far as the regulatory role is concerned, which is envisaged in the Grenfell Phase inquiry report. Then whether it be useful to bring back a chief construction advisor for the other aspects of the government's relationship with the industry, its client and its sponsor, I think that can be left for another day, I would say. I think it was useful to have somebody in a neutral position. And I used to criticize for not lobbying for the industry, by the industry. And I said, well, the day I do that, the job's dead. You just go, oh, we're just a lobbyist for the industry. I generally try to think what would be good for our customers in the longer term, the issues of productivity and improved productivity, removing barriers to trade that are unnecessary and so on. I still think that would be useful, but it's very hard to find people who, by definition, are free of vested interest. So I was retired from my day job, and wouldn't accept a secondment from my old firm for just that reason. I wanted to be absolutely clear that I would have no commercial interest, would take no alternative income while I was in that role. And I think that's a proper way to behave in that role. But that means you need to be kind towards the end of your career. At least I thought I was towards the end of my career. I haven't made a very good job of finishing it. But. So, not the same job. Therefore, two discussions really.
And I think when you had that job, the first time I heard you present, and so I think was the time you were doing low carbon construction report back in 2008, 2009. Like 15 years later, are we starting to get there in terms of making like better buildings, more sustainable buildings?
Yeah, that was 9-10. And I always say the first meeting I attended or chaired in Whitehall, just before I started, actually, attended by Peter Mandelson, who threw down that challenge of, are you ready for a low carbon future? To which the answer was manifestly no. If I did that report again, I'd do it differently. It was such a massive subject. I kind of did a smorgasbord report. These are all the bits. Pick up the bits that you think are relevant to you and run with it, as opposed to the three big things that ministers are always looking for. And in truth, so they take some responsibility for it being too diverse and not clear enough about what had to happen next. It got immediate ministerial support by Mark Prisk, who's a good minister. He took it far more seriously than I might say these officials did, who thought it wasn't a priority subject. He thought it was. So he created the Green Construction Board.
Yeah.
But it is heartbreaking what's happened since, really, because I spent time meeting people from international markets ministerial level or senior official level, who wanted to know what we were doing and how they could follow it. We had the potential, overstated, the potential for a really significant international leadership role, and we threw it away. For whatever reason, we threw it away. And of course, if you make, and the industry was moving towards the expectation that it's going to have to perform in a low carbon world. And when George Osborne suggested that we should scrub zero carbon homes, for example, I did say at the only meeting I had with him, before you do that, go down to Excel and look at how many businesses are designing products and services around the assumption that we will have to address this problem at some time, and you'll be trashing billions of investment. It survived that, it cleared that hurdle that time, but it fell later. And I honestly don't understand why. Ministers gave up the potential for an international role. And my overgrand statement probably at the time was, how about being the first country in the world that knows how to decarbonize an entire economy? If you believe that the problem is real, and there are only a few nutters who don't anymore, if you believe the problem is real, everybody in the end is going to do something about it. How about getting there first? And we've lost that position, and that's kind of heartbreaking. So yeah, it's good to see it's come back. There are things in that report like the idea of taxing carbon at the border, which were described as insane by the Department of Business at the time. Because how can you track every part? Which the answer, my answer then is, we'll track the money on them all. Yeah, and we need a carbon measures of an economy, and net carbon added, gross carbon added, and a balance sheet for carbon. So, and it's kind of quite good to see that coming back.
Yeah, the CBAM.
So yeah, I hope we're back on track. But of course, every time any government does the right thing about carbon, its electorate tells it doesn't like it. It doesn't like paying more for its petrol, or whatever it might be. It doesn't like a restriction on the use of its car. It doesn't like, I kind of get that. But I don't know any way of getting to the answer other than a regulatory one.
Yeah, I remember the time you talk about go down to London Excel and see all of the companies. Like, as a technology company, we were developing an embodied carbon green light indicator linked to the 3D model and specification, and it just seemed that the initiative died away as the stimulus stopped. And we're doing it again now, 10, 15 years later, and you think, well, we could have done it. We could have done it 10 years ago.
The reason for it was because the more you start to address operational carbon, the more important in the end, embodied carbon becomes. It becomes what you've got left to play with. But most particularly, if you start to regulate against embodied carbon, all you're going to do is export your jobs. Then you're going to buy the product back with more carbon added and pay the price on top. So you have to control it at the border, and that's what got to the recommendation about that in 2010. I think it was 8.
Yeah, and our 5 or 6 minute chat has turned into a half an hour chat, but I do want to ask one more question.
Good luck to the editor then, I guess. Yeah. Okay.
With increased regulation on building safety, potentially increased regulation on sustainability, carbon, with people not in my backyard for new projects, are we really going to make 1.5 million new homes in this Parliament?
Yeah. And I thought there was a major disappointment, not the aspiration, because God knows, I did say to a housing minister just after I left government, what do we make of a nation that can't house its people? It's a duty of government as much as defending the realm and defending the currency. So God knows we need to fix it. But the plea that one would make is that we don't, and I believe in targets, but I don't believe in targets that have no plan, no realistic plan. And I kind of was praying that we might get a target that said something like, we will build 300,000 houses in the last year of this Parliament, and here's how we will do that. And instead, we've jumped to a number, and of course the Conservative therefore instantly said, we'll build 1.6 million, and you get into an insane game of one-upmanship. I don't think there's any prospect of building 1.5 million homes. I'd love to be wrong. And I will say, apologies for lack of vision. In 5 years' time, if we built 1.5 million, but to get from where we are, without the resources, without the materials, to make sure those houses are safe, while we're being told to change the regulatory environment, change the government department that's responsible for it, and so on. I can't see any way, but I can just about see how we can get to 300,000 a year, maybe a few more. We've only ever once got to 350,000 for 1 year. And we've only, I think, twice in history got to 300,000. So I was kind of surprised that so much, in a world in which we wanted to get away from what I heard Ed Davey call, Yahoo politics. I was kind of surprised and a bit disappointed that we suddenly went for a target that feels to me to be undeliverable, without at least a narrative as to how it might be achieved. I don't think planning was the big problem. And so one has a slight worry that when it's demonstrated that planning has been changed, but the problem still hasn't been fixed, the government will say, well, what can we do? The private sector hasn't built the houses. It never has. The private sector has only ever built about 150,000 a year. So why would it suddenly double its output? How could it double its output? So we need a major social housing program. And yet the Chancellor Visheka, in describing why they needed to change the planning laws, said, well, because we're not going to build them. Sorry, but you need to. Public sector needs to build about half the houses we need. And it lacks capacity too, and fragments its demand. So offsite, fine, but not if it's 30 or 40 houses per housing association and so on. So no, it's not going to be achieved. And I guess the target having been laid down, it would be good to see the industry rally around and say, look, never mind, Yahoo sucks on the target. This is what a realistic plan looks like to build as many houses as we can.
Yeah.
Some on site, some off site, some social, some private rented, some private for sale. This is what a trend would look like. And by the way, this is then what has to happen so we can. In terms of the customers having money, the industry being able to borrow money to buy land and so on, land coming forward. What does that look like? So you see the house builders celebrating the fact that they're told it's going to be easy to get planning. But now ask them, so you're going to build 300,000? No, they're not. So it's a kind of disappointment. But rather than wallow in that, I'd rather say, as an industry, what realistically might be made and what has to happen so we can.
Yeah, no, good note to end on. Okay, well, that's been fantastic to have the chance to chat, and I always enjoy just listening and learning from you, Paul, and really looking forward to the conference next week. So thank you very much.
I look forward to, and good luck to the editor of this conversation.
Yes, bye-bye.